My cheating wife wanted to humiliate me at the company party, but she didn't expect me to tell her that it was over and that she wouldn't get any of our assets. It was as if the air around us was filled with an oppressive silence, the kind that precedes a moment of imminent explosion. The room was full, the laughter and conversations of colleagues echoed through the walls decorated with elegant, golden details. But there, in the middle of it all, my world was about to come crashing down. Or perhaps it had already collapsed a long time ago, and I, out of blindness or loyalty, had chosen not to notice. At that party, she was radiant. Too much. The kind of brightness that bothered. It was not the joy of professional success, nor the shine of someone who is proud of an achievement. It was the kind of smile that carried a quiet arrogance, as if she had something more that everyone there didn't know. Something that I, supposedly, was also unaware of. As she circulated among the groups of employees, I watched her, each gesture studied, each forced smile, and I wondered how it all got there. How did respect die? I knew. I knew too well. From the furtive glances she exchanged with him, that guy who to this day makes me question my own sanity, to the lame excuses about long meetings that never seemed to end. I was suspicious, of course. But I never thought it would go this far. And then, that night, confirmation came. It was supposed to be a celebration, the company holiday party, a place for laughter and toasts, but for me, it would become the scene of a brutal revelation. She made a point of exposing me, of making it clear to everyone there that the situation between us was not what it seemed. With a glass of champagne in her hands, she laughed and commented something that made some colleagues look sideways. Something about men who can't keep up with their wives, or who don't understand a woman's ambitions. The humiliation, cold and calculated, hit me hard. I stared at her. And it was in that moment, in that split second, that I knew it was over. There, between laughter and curious looks, she thought she had control. She didn't know. I didn't know I was that far ahead. Far beyond what she even imagined. While she tried to diminish me, I could only think about one thing, the end. And I was prepared for that end. She laughed again, her voice cutting through the room. But inside, I no longer heard anything. Because in my mind I was repeating the words I was about to say. Words that, once spoken, would change everything. It's all over. Those were the words that would save me from years of disrespect, lies and betrayal. But more than that, she had no idea what was coming. I thought I would get away with it, that I would get away with everything. But she would have nothing. And that, I knew, would be the final blow. Looking around, I saw the looks of pity and curiosity, but what they didn't know was that, this time, I had control. I had everything ready. While she was toasting her own arrogance, I had already spoken to lawyers. I had already transferred everything into my name, I had already guaranteed that she wouldn't even have the car she was driving. I was waiting for the right moment. And he was about to arrive. But what she didn't expect, what no one there expected, was that destiny is merciless to those who challenge it. She had her boss at her side, laughing with her, an accomplice in her betrayal, in her dirty game. They thought they were above everything, above me. But there, in the middle of the party, what they tried so hard to hide would be revealed. She was about to lose more than her marriage. She was about to lose her career. Time seemed to slow down. Every step she took was a reminder of the false sense of power she carried. I saw her walking away, laughing, confident, but what I had in my hands was something she couldn't avoid. Proof that his professional rise was not just the result of hard work. The boss who now stood beside her, the one she used as an ally, was not just a boss. He was the reason for her long, work nights. But there, in front of everyone, the price she paid to be where she was would be exposed. I took a deep breath. The end was near. And as she bragged about her conquests, I moved closer, tasting imminent revenge. Silence took over the room, the sparkle in her eyes began to waver, and I knew she was beginning to understand. And it was there, at that exact moment, that I realized, the humiliation that she so wanted to inflict on me would come back to her relentlessly. "It's over," I said. She froze. What would come next? She had no idea. But one thing was certain, nothing would be the same again. And there, in that crowded room, with the lights flashing above us, the pieces were in motion. She would lose everything, more than she imagined. I was already free. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never justify any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they clearly show how betrayal destroys lives, relationships and trust. Get ready, because what comes next is a shocking story, full of twists and turns and raw emotions. Sit back, relax and enjoy, but remember, betrayal always takes its toll. Good story. Jonathan stared at his reflection in the bedroom mirror, his tie almost finished, but his hands were shaking slightly. He had never been a man with nerves on edge, always confident, methodical and serene. But that night there was something different. As he adjusted his collar, his mind wandered over the last few months, moments that seemed to slip through his fingers like fine sand, getting lost without him even noticing. He couldn't exactly pinpoint when things started to change, but the discomfort in his chest indicated that, at some point, everything had gone wrong. That company holiday party would be the first one he would attend alongside his wife, Olivia, in a long time. In recent years, the two were increasingly busy, involved in their chaotic routines, each focused on their own ambitions. Jonathan had invested years in building his career as a lawyer at one of the city's most respected firms. Olivia, on the other hand, had made her way in the marketing company where she worked, climbing step after step until she became one of the most respected directors. In a way, Jonathan admired his wife's determination. Olivia had always been a focused, intelligent and self-assured woman, with a sparkle that attracted the attention of everyone around her. It was part of what had won him over so many years ago. They met at college, two young people full of dreams and aspirations. Over time, life became more complex, but the love and respect between them never seemed to waver. However, something was different. And Jonathan knew it. As he finished getting ready, he could hear the sound of Olivia's heels echoing through the hallway, the rhythm steady but sure, as expected of her. She always made an entrance, whether in a room full of executives or at a simple family gathering. And, when he saw her walk through the bedroom door, Jonathan felt that old pride and a tightness in his chest at the same time. Olivia looked stunning, as always, wearing a dress that highlighted her elegant frame and the effortless confidence she exuded. She smiled, that smile that Jonathan knew so well but that now seemed distant, cold in a way he couldn't fully understand. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft, but without the heat that usually accompanied it. "Yes, I am," he replied, trying to shake off his discomfort. He walked over, straightening a strand of hair that had escaped Olivia's meticulous hairstyle. For a moment, they stood like that, close but distant. It was as if an invisible barrier separated them, something intangible but undeniable. Jonathan wanted to ask, wanted to know if Olivia felt the same way, but the words just wouldn't come. The night progressed with almost unbearable slowness. The party room was full of coworkers, lively conversations and toasts. Jonathan mingled with the groups, chatting here and there, but always with one eye on Olivia, who moved with grace among the guests, always the center of attention. There was something about her behavior that bothered him, a detachment, an absence that he couldn't explain. Jonathan remembered when parties were different for them. Years before, they attended these events hand in hand, laughing together, sharing complicit glances. But now, the physical closeness they maintained did not disguise the gap that seemed to grow between them. At one point in the evening, while Olivia was chatting animatedly with some coworkers, Jonathan walked away, needing a moment to clear his mind. He stepped out onto the terrace, the cool night air welcoming him as a relief. Watching the city lights in the distance, he allowed himself to reflect on what had changed. It wasn't just the pace of life, the busy routines or the long hours at work. It was something deeper, something that had been slowly eroding the foundation of their relationship. Jonathan couldn't identify when their conversations had become superficial, when Olivia's touch had become rare and distant. The small pleasantries of everyday life were replaced by an uncomfortable formality. The lack of communication, the growing silence, the dinners where they were both more occupied with their phones than with each other. Something was broken. Suddenly, the sound of laughter from inside broke him out of his thoughts. He turned, watching Olivia once more. She was close to her boss, an imposing figure who always seemed to loom over her like a shadow. They laughed, they talked informally, but something in the way Olivia looked at him, a slight tilt of her head, a slightly longer smile, made Jonathan feel a chill. That wasn't new. Jonathan had noticed it before, but he always pushed the thoughts away as if it were just a figment of his imagination. But now, that night, in that context, everything seemed clearer. There was something happening, something he was afraid to acknowledge. And the worst thing was the feeling that he already knew the answer, but wasn't ready to confront it yet. Before he could delve further into these thoughts, Olivia approached. "Are you okay?" she asked, feigning concern that Jonathan knew was superficial. He forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, I just needed some air." She looked at him for a moment, and Jonathan almost felt like she could see through him, like she knew what he was thinking. But instead of pressing, she just smiled and went back inside. Jonathan stayed there, on the terrace, for a few more minutes, trying to collect his thoughts. He knew something was wrong, and he knew that at some point he would have to deal with it. But not today. Not at that party. He didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to confront her there, in front of everyone. Still, the weight of doubt continued to tighten his chest. When he finally decided to return to the hall, he had already mentally prepared himself. He wouldn't let his suspicions ruin the night. At least, not yet. But as he watched Olivia, the way she mingled with the other guests, the way her eyes sparkled with something he could no longer identify, Jonathan knew deep down that this would be temporary. The time to confront whatever was going on between them was approaching, and he couldn't put it off any longer. For now, he just stood at a distance, watching, waiting for the right moment. The night was still far from over, but Jonathan knew that soon, the facade of normalcy that he and Olivia had maintained for so long would begin to crumble. Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort that had followed him since the beginning of the night. Although he tried to distract himself with the conversations, toasts, and happy atmosphere of the party, it was as if a shadow hung over him, impossible to ignore. He couldn't say exactly what was different about Olivia that night, but her every gesture seemed charged with a subtle tension, something he couldn't completely define, but felt deeply. The party continued with loud music and laughter echoing through the bright hall. Jonathan, who had always been discreet, stood in a corner, watching. He had never been the controlling or paranoid type of husband, but Olivia's behavior over the past few weeks had ignited something inside him. She was more distant, leaving work later, always with an excuse ready about meetings, deadlines, or company events. He wanted to believe that this was part of the responsibilities of his position as director, but doubt, once planted, grew unchecked. From his vantage point, Jonathan watched as Olivia walked away from the group she was talking to and walked towards her boss, the imposing man with an easy laugh, always surrounded by subordinates seeking his approval. The way she approached him, the familiarity in the light touch on his arm, made Jonathan's stomach turn. He could no longer ignore it. There was something there. Something he didn't want to see, but was clearly in front of him. With each passing second, the tension between them became more palpable. Olivia spoke to him in a casual way, but their gazes met with an intensity that didn't match the light atmosphere of the party. Jonathan clenched the glass in his hand, feeling a rush of heat run up his spine. He tried to push the idea away, tried to believe that he was exaggerating, that it was just a figment of his imagination. But their behavior, the way their bodies leaned slightly toward each other, as if they shared a secret, was impossible to ignore. He took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was beginning to bubble in his chest. At that moment, a decision slowly formed within him: he would discover the truth. There was no longer room for assumptions, for excuses. Something was happening. And he could no longer pretend that everything was fine. With firm steps, Jonathan began to circulate around the room, always keeping Olivia and the boss in his line of sight. They seemed completely oblivious to his presence, wrapped up in their own bubble as the rest of the event unfolded around them. He watched every movement, every smile, every disguised touch. Everything he feared was unfolding there, right in front of his eyes. During a lull in the conversation, Olivia walked away with a neutral expression, perhaps to touch up her makeup or simply take a breather away from the social interactions she, lately, seemed to avoid at home. Jonathan saw his opportunity. As she discreetly left the room towards the bathroom, he decided to follow her, his heart racing and his mind filled with scenarios he didn't want to face. In the hallway, the silence of the night contrasted with the distant buzz of the party. Jonathan walked slowly, his footsteps echoing off the walls as he tried to decide if he was truly ready to discover the truth. As he turned the corner, he saw her standing, not in the bathroom, as he assumed, but in a far corner, talking on her cell phone. Her tone of voice, although low, seemed urgent, unlike the confident woman he knew. He hid, unable to interrupt, and heard only fragments, but enough to feed his worst suspicions. "I can't talk right now." "Yes, he is here. I will find a way, but not today." I know, Jonathan's blood ran cold. What he feared was being confirmed. There was someone else. Another side of Olivia's life that he didn't know about, but that was clearly taking up more space than he could ever imagine. Betrayal, once just an uncomfortable possibility, now loomed before him as a painful certainty. Jonathan felt a mixture of fury and pain explode inside him. For a moment he thought about confronting her right there, about asking her about each time she had left him alone, each night she had said she was working late. But he held back. It wasn't the time. He needed more. He needed certainty, something that could remove any and all doubts from him. Olivia hung up the phone and stood there for a few seconds. She took a deep breath, as if preparing to return to the party and resume her role as the perfect wife. Jonathan, on the other side of the corridor, just watched her, feeling helpless in the face of the situation. Her face was serene, but he knew that behind that mask, there was something more, something she was hiding from him. Something that, at that moment, he was determined to discover. When Olivia returned to the ballroom, Jonathan didn't immediately follow. He stood there, alone, in the hallway, trying to process what he had just heard. Her every word on the phone echoed in his mind like a cruel reminder that everything he believed about his marriage was falling apart. The party continued, laughter and music filling the atmosphere, but for Jonathan, nothing made sense anymore. With a heavy heart, he returned to the room and saw her again, now next to his boss, exchanging smiles and conversations. The momentary relief she showed at returning to the safety of that inner circle did not go unnoticed by Jonathan. What was once just a suspicion was now an open wound. The betrayal was clear, but the reason, the secret behind everything, still remained beyond his reach. He knew that, soon, he would have the answers he was looking for. But the question that was going through his mind was, would he be ready to hear the truth? Jonathan felt the weight of the night piled up on his shoulders, but now there was something more. It wasn't just tiredness, it was the uncomfortable certainty that something big was about to happen. He knew Olivia had lied, that there was something deeper behind the fake smiles and subtle touches exchanged between her and her boss. The phone conversation, although brief, was enough to dismantle any trace of trust he was still trying to hold on to. The betrayal was clear. But the reason, the why behind it all, remained a mystery. Jonathan returned to the room, keeping his distance, observing how Olivia interacted with the people around her. She seemed completely at ease, laughing, toasting, casting glances and smiles at her boss with an intimacy that would previously have gone unnoticed by him. Now, it was as if everything was in slow motion, revealing every previously hidden detail. Jonathan clenched his fists, feeling the anger bubble again in his chest. He knew he couldn't confront her there, in the middle of the party, not without concrete evidence. But he also knew that tonight was the last night he would allow this to continue. There would be no more excuses, no more secrets. He approached slowly, with firm steps, determined. Olivia didn't notice him right away, still immersed in her conversation with her boss, until he stopped next to her. The silence that followed was immediate and dense. "We can talk?" Jonathan asked, his voice controlled but carrying a weight that Olivia couldn't ignore. She turned around, surprised by his sudden presence, but soon composed her expression, adopting the mask of neutrality that he already knew well. "Of course, honey. Now." "Now," he stated, leaving no room for argument. Olivia's eyes lit up with something that Jonathan couldn't fully decipher. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was just irritation at being taken out of her comfort zone. She looked at her boss, who was watching her with silent curiosity, as if he was expecting something more than just a couple's conversation. Olivia nodded to Jonathan and, with a slight smile for her boss, followed her husband towards a more secluded corner of the party. The tension between them was palpable. Jonathan could feel Olivia's nervousness in the air as she tried to maintain her composure. "What it was?" she asked, feigning lightness, although her voice wavered slightly. Jonathan didn't waste time beating around the bush. "I heard your conversation earlier." Olivia froze for a brief second, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Jonathan felt his own voice harden. "You were on the phone, hiding, while I watched you. I spoke to you after that as if nothing had happened, but I heard enough to understand what's going on." Olivia crossed her arms defensively. "You're being paranoid, Jonathan. I don't know what you think you heard, but you're clearly confusing things." "I'm not confusing anything." Jonathan approached, his gaze penetrating. "You're cheating on me, Olivia. And there's no denying it anymore." She stared at him, her face now completely devoid of any pretense. For an instant, Jonathan saw a flash of vulnerability, but it was quickly replaced by a coldness he had never seen in her before. "Yes," Olivia said finally, her voice low, almost as if she was admitting something insignificant. "I am." Jonathan felt a sharp blow to his stomach. Even though I was waiting for confirmation, hearing those words come out of her mouth was like a stab. The betrayal was there, naked and raw. Years of trust, of companionship, of love, thrown away in such a simple sentence. "Why?" he asked, trying to control the pain reverberating in his voice. "Why did you do that?" Olivia sighed, as if she were tired of carrying that secret. "Because I needed it, Jonathan. I needed something more. Our marriage, you know, it wasn't working anymore. We could have resolved this," he replied, feeling his frustration growing. "You could have talked to me. Instead, you chose to cheat." She shook her head, her eyes cold. "Settle? How? We had been living separate lives for years. I just moved on. You got busy with your work, with your career, and I did the same. Only, in my case, I found something, or someone, that made me feel alive again." Jonathan almost laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of pain. "Someone like your boss?" Olivia hesitated, and in that moment, Jonathan knew he had hit the nail on the head. Her silence spoke louder than any response. "I saw you with him," Jonathan continued, anger growing with each word. "You two, so close, so comfortable with each other. And now it makes sense. It makes sense why you were always away, always with an excuse ready for every night I asked you where you were." She didn't respond right away, just stared at him, as if trying to calculate her next words carefully. "Jonathan, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But don't think this was easy for me." "Easy?" he repeated in disbelief. You speak as if you had no choice, as if I were to blame for all of this. It's not about guilt, Olivia replied, her voice finally thick with emotion. I was unhappy. And so were you, even if you never admitted it. We walked away from each other a long time ago, and I found a way out. Jonathan took a step back, feeling the weight of her words, as if each syllable was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. The truth was there, naked and painful. Olivia had betrayed him, not just physically, but emotionally. She had found comfort in another man's arms, and that destroyed any chance of reconciliation. I never imagined you would be capable of this, Jonathan said, his voice low. I never imagined you would stab me in the back like that. Olivia looked at him, and for the first time that night, tears came to her eyes. I didn't want it to be like this, Jonathan. I swear. But I don't know if I can take it back now. Jonathan shook his head, unable to process everything he was hearing. Olivia's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the anger and disgust that now dominated every part of her being. It's all over, Olivia, he said, with a firmness that even he himself was unfamiliar with. You made your choice. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, her tears finally streaming down her face. She knew that this was the end, that there was no going back. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overflow. But he knew that despite the betrayal, there was still more to be said. There was still something Olivia didn't know. Something that would change everything. Jonathan remained motionless for a few seconds after his final statement, the silence between him and Olivia as thick as the tension that filled the air. He knew that the moment his words echoed for the last time in that small corner of the party would be a definitive dividing line. The feeling was strange, almost surreal. Years of marriage, of complicity and trust, now reduced to dust in just one night. Olivia watched him with teary eyes, perhaps for the first time really feeling the impact of what she had caused. Still, Jonathan felt there was something more. The betrayal had been exposed, yes, but Olivia's reactions, although full of emotion, did not bring the whole truth to light. She knew this was the end, but somewhere he could tell she also feared what came next. It wasn't the fear of losing their marriage, of losing the life they'd built together, but a deeper fear, a fear that Jonathan was aware of more than she knew. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling his initial anger melt into a cold, calculated calm. He knew he couldn't end the night there, simply with the realization of betrayal. There was something deeper to be revealed, and he was prepared for it. Olivia quickly wiped away the tears that were streaming down her face, as if trying to compose herself was a way to maintain some control of the situation. Jonathan, she began, but was soon interrupted. No need to explain further, he said, his voice low but firm. The betrayal is already clear, but you didn't completely deceive me. She looked at him, confused, as if she didn't understand what he was implying. Jonathan continued, do you think it comes down to feelings? That the betrayal was just physical? I know you're hiding more. The words hung in the air, carrying weight. Olivia was silent for a moment, her eyes moving quickly, as if she were calculating what to say, or maybe just trying to find a way out. She shook her head slowly, trying to maintain her composure, but Jonathan knew she could no longer maintain that facade. Before Olivia could respond, her boss, who had stood at a distance, seemingly uninterested, appeared at the entrance to the hallway. His presence was a clear reminder of the professional bond that connected them and, at that moment, the tension between them became even more evident. Jonathan turned to him, giving him a direct, almost challenging look. He knew that this man was an integral part of the secret that had not yet been revealed, and now there was no way back. The boss smiled, a smile that seemed full of pretension and superiority, as if he believed he still had control of the situation. Is everything okay here? He asked with fake concern, as if he had the right to intervene in this conversation. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He kept his gaze fixed on the man for a few seconds, measuring each word he would say next. No, it's not okay, he said, with an unsettling calm. And I believe you know exactly why. The boss's smile disappeared for a brief moment, but he soon regained it, trying to maintain an air of superiority. Jonathan, you are making assumptions that will get you nowhere. I think we should keep this between you and Olivia. Jonathan took a step forward, narrowing his eyes. Between me and Olivia, he repeated, his voice growing colder and colder. Do you really think this is still a thing between us? I know what's going on here, and it's not just betrayal. Olivia now looked panicked, her eyes darting from Jonathan to her boss, as if she was waiting for one of them to break the tense silence that hung over them. But Jonathan knew she was out of options. She had crossed a line, and what was about to happen was beyond any excuse or regret. You used more than our marriage to promote yourself, Olivia, Jonathan continued, without missing a beat. You got involved with him to get what you wanted at work, to move up in the company. It wasn't just about me, it was about everything you could get out of it. Olivia took a step back, eyes wide. No. It's not true, she murmured, but Jonathan knew her denial was empty. The boss, trying to regain control, stepped forward, but Jonathan raised his hand, cutting him off. I have already spoken to your company's human resources department. I have proof. You, Olivia, traded our marriage for a career ladder. You played dirty, and now you're going to pay for it. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia couldn't maintain her posture. Her tears, this time, were not just of sadness, but of fear. She knew what was coming. He knew that, with that revelation, his world would fall apart. Jonathan took a step back, feeling the weight of the situation finally leveling out. He wasn't just there to expose the betrayal. He was there to make sure Olivia understood the real consequences of her actions. She would lose everything, her marriage, the stability she had built with so much effort and, now, also the career she had placed above all else. You're going to have to face the consequences of what you did, both in our lives and at work, Jonathan said, his voice returning to a controlled tone. And I won't be here to hold your hand when it all falls apart. Olivia sobbed, unable to respond. She knew that, at that moment, everything was over. Jonathan took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs. He had said everything he needed to. Now, Olivia's fate was in the hands of the decisions she herself had made. And for Jonathan, that was the only justice possible. As he walked away, leaving Olivia and the boss alone in the hallway, a feeling of relief began to wash over him. It wasn't the end he had imagined for his life, but it was the end that needed to happen. And as the door closed behind him, Jonathan knew the worst was yet to come, not for him, but for her. Jonathan left the party with firm steps, leaving behind the whirlwind of emotions and the collapse of everything he once believed to be his foundation. The feeling of relief was mixed with deep sadness, but now, there was something different. The uncertainty that had tormented him for so long was gone. He knew the truth, and it brought him a strange, almost liberating clarity. However, the weight of betrayal and humiliation still hung on his shoulders, like a burden that would not be easy to carry. He stood outside for a moment, the cold night air washing over him, and closed his eyes. He was alone, but he felt like this was the first step towards a new reality, a future in which he would no longer have to wonder about what was wrong in his marriage. What would come next, he still didn't know for sure. But he was sure of one thing, there would be no room for regret. Back at the party, Olivia remained in the same place, completely still. The boss had discreetly walked away, leaving her alone with her silent tears and the weight of the consequences that she now understood in all their severity. The rise in the company, the power she had sought so fervently, all of it seemed insignificant at that moment. It was no longer a question of success or career, it was about what she had lost. Jonathan had been her companion for years, the man she once loved, but she had left him for selfish ambitions that, in the end, were worthless. Jonathan's revelation of what he knew, and what he had already done to expose the situation, was the final blow. She knew she couldn't escape what was coming. Her job was hanging by a thread, her marriage was on the rocks, and deep down she knew Jonathan wasn't just bluffing. He was always a man of his word, and if he had proof, the end of his career was just a matter of time. What Olivia felt at that moment was not just regret, but a deep emptiness. She had betrayed Jonathan, she had betrayed herself, and now she was alone. For the first time, she found herself without any control. The man she thought she could count on, the boss she had gotten involved with, had disappeared the moment things got difficult. The ambition she had so desperately pursued now seemed like an illusion. The fall would be inevitable. In the weeks that followed, the consequences were relentless. News about the inappropriate relationship between Olivia and her boss spread quickly within the company. The corporate environment, which previously revered her, now treated her coldly. His dismissal was quick, and the boss, who was also exposed, tried to negotiate his departure with as little damage as possible. But the scandal was already on everyone's lips. There was no going back. For Olivia, the fall was devastating. She lost not only her job, but also the respect of her colleagues and herself. Doors that once seemed open to new opportunities were now closed. She tried to hold on to some shred of dignity, but all that was left was the silence of lonely nights in an empty apartment. Jonathan, on the other hand, moved on. It wasn't easy. The divorce process was painful, but he was determined to rebuild his life away from the weight of the past. The love he had for Olivia had turned into a bitter memory, but over time, he began to rediscover who he was beyond marriage. The freedom he feared so much, after all, brought a new perspective, a fresh start. He walked away from everything that reminded him of Olivia. The house, the photos, everything was left behind. Jonathan dedicated himself to his work and his friends, surrounding himself with people who truly cared about him. There were times when he still felt the pain of betrayal, but he knew that, deep down, it had been a release. Olivia, isolated and aimless, tried to contact Jonathan a few times. She knew there was no chance of reconciliation, but loneliness consumed her. The calls, however, were never answered. Jonathan had made a choice. He had closed that chapter of his life forever. Olivia's boss, following the scandal, was also forced to leave the company. The reputation he had built over the years was destroyed in a matter of weeks. What he thought was a simple extramarital affair became the center of a hurricane, and, like Olivia, he found himself at a loss. The opportunities he so valued were now non-existent. The power he thought he had over his own career, and over those around him, crumbled irrevocably. Months later, Jonathan was walking down a new street, in a new city. He had changed his address, started a new chapter in his life, and, despite the scars he carried, he felt lighter. What he had learned from all this was clear: betrayal destroys in silent ways, corroding not only the betrayed, but the betrayer as well. And as painful as it was, he was ready to move on. He stopped for a moment in a coffee shop, observing the movement around him. People came and went, each with their own stories, their own battles. And there, at that moment, he allowed himself something he hadn't done in a long time: he smiled. It was a discreet smile, perhaps shy, but filled with a new perspective. Life had shown him his darkest side, but it had also freed him. Olivia, in turn, now lived with the weight of her choices. The feeling of power, the adrenaline of his impulsive actions, all of that was gone. And in the end, she realized that the true price of betrayal was not just the lost marriage or career, but the inner peace that she would never be able to recover. And you? What did you think of this story? Betrayal is something that corrodes people's lives, leaving deep scars. Comment below your opinion about the outcome and what you would do in a situation like this. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to join now. Here, the stories show how betrayal can destroy lives, but also how a fresh start is always possible. And remember, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Until the next story.